Hi there, it's Kathie. Thanks so much for joining me. I finally have some alternate cards to share with you featuring the May 2019 Paper Pumpkin Kit. And I know I'm kind of late or super late, but I'm sharing them nonetheless. Okay, for the first card, we're going to do some white heat embossing. I have white embossing powder there, Versamark ink, the flower cluster, Whisper white panel, and some painter's tape. And we're just going to stamp across that panel with the flower cluster, and then we'll just hit white heat emboss that. I do end up doing that off screen because my outlet here is not working properly. So I'm just slathering on the powder, and then I've heat embossed it. All right, with soft seafoam, I'm just coloring in the leaves so that I can see where the image is. It is tough to see after you've heat embossed it. And then with Blushing Bride, we'll just color in all of the flower petals. Once you heat emboss it, the image does become kind of tiny for coloring, so you can't really add too much detail to it. But nonetheless, I do go in with the Melon Mambo and just kind of dab the center parts of each of the petals and then hit it with an aqua brush. Just to give it a little bit of detail. All right, so with Balmy Blue coming up next, with the sponge dauber, I just sponge just above the image across the panel. So I do lay down a light shade first, and then I do come back in a little heavier. And then that's when I do kind of touch or shade over top of the flowers. That's because I just didn't want to make a little mask. So you're going to see that I've kind of shaded over top of some of the flowers there. And this is where I decided to go with Plan B and just color in all of the flowers with Melon Mambo. It is a small enough image that you can color it in really quick. And although Melon Mambo is a bright, dark color, I do bring in Cherry Cobbler and just kind of touch each of the petals just to give it some depth, and then I'll blend it in with the aqua brush. And I use Granny Apple Green to get those leaves a little bit darker. All right, and then we'll just stamp the sentiment. Thank you, dear friend, and I stamp that with black VersaFine ink. And the twine is from the kit. And I think I twirled that around 4 times. I think maybe 2 or 3 would have been fine because it is somewhat of a dainty image. But I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And then the single flowers, I colored in the centers with Melon Mambo and then blended it with Blushing Bride just to give it more depth. And the one flower, I stuck it down with a glue dot, and the one next to the thank you, I stuck it down with a dimensional. So I had some pearls on my desk, so I'm going to add a few pearls to this card just to dress it up just a bit more. I did take off about 1/8 of an inch on both sides, so the panel measures 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And then I stuck it onto a top folding card base. All right, moving on to the second quickie card, I heat embossed the image where I've grouped it a little bit more closer and a little more fuller. And now I'm just going to color it in next. With Melon Mambo Stamp and Write marker, I just added some color to an acrylic block and then picked it up with an aqua brush and then colored in the image. All right, and then I just sponge the top the same way with the Balmy Blue, and the bottom section I lightly sponged in Granny Apple Green. So because this image is a little bit heavier on the top, I was able to use the Pretty Velvet ribbon, and then I stuck a double die cut flower onto it and a few more pearls. And I did cut this panel down the same way to have 1/8 of an inch border all the way around, and I put it onto a top folding card base. So that was a quickie card, just to give you an idea if you were to stamp it a little bit closer And I did my best to not get it to overlap. So, but yeah, I like both of them. They came out pretty. All right, moving on to the third card. We're using Sahara Sand Crumb Cake. And I was going to gold emboss the feather, but I decided not to. And we're using the card base that has the newsprint look. And I have it where the blue specks are on the top left. And we're going to stamp with early espresso and crushed curry. And starting off with the early espresso, we're going to stamp the feather. And we're going to lay it out like it's falling. I've seen this layout of the falling feathers on other cards, and it's quite pretty. And that second feather, I didn't quite press hard enough, so we're just going to draw in the image just to fix that up with the Stampin' Right marker. Okay, and then with crushed curry, we're going to stamp over top of the feathers. So we're going to do it about 3 times. We're going to slightly offset, so you don't have to be perfect when you stamp this part. And the reason why I'm stamping it 3 times is because I was going to gold emboss it, but I decided not to, and I really wanted that gold to stand out. So that's the reason why I'm stamping it at least 2 or 3 times. All right, so I have the crushed curry Stampin' Right marker, and we're going to scribble color in the sections that have the lines in the feather. But I'm not coloring it in solidly, so I do leave little bits of white here and there for some dimension. And then with Pineapple Punch, we're going to color in the white areas of that feather. And again, we're going to leave some white specks here and there. All right, so now we're done with the feathers, and then moving on to Crumb Cake. We're going to use the Dear Friend sentiment, and we're going to stamp all the way down over top of the feathers. So this part, you want to stamp straight and straight down. So if you think you need to draw a margin on the left side, you can, but I basically just eyeballed this. I did go about it quite slow, just to make sure. Okay, now the sentiment, I flipped it over to the other side. And with Sahara Sand, we're going to stamp over top of the Dear Friend word. We're going to stamp off first because it is going to be too dark, and then we'll stamp. So if you don't think this part is necessary, you can skip it, but I just thought I'd add this in just to give it a little bit more interest. And with the same early espresso, I'm going to stamp the sentiment hello. And you can stamp this in black if you want. And now we're going to chop this card down. The right side of that panel, we're going to use it for the next card coming up. So I did hack this card up, and I just made sure that image was centered. And it is 3 1/4 by 4 1/2. And with soft suede, we're going to shade all the way around this panel. But you can just leave it the way it is if you're happy with the way it looks. But I like to shade around it because it gives it a little more depth and the image will pop out a bit more. Next, we're just going to stick this onto a top folding card base. So we don't need to have an extra panel for this one. And I've grabbed a single flower die cut from the kit and raised it with a dimensional and a double flower. And I decided not to add any pearls to this one because it has a couple of blue specks here and there. So that is our third card, I guess. And then we'll jump into a couple of stills. And how do you like my background? I got it off of Amazon. I like this white wood background. It's quite pretty. All right, so on to the last card. Pacific Point is the first color we're going to use. And the panel measures 3.5 inches by 3.25. With the flower cluster, we're just going to stamp all the way around the panel. So you want kind of like a circle once you're done in the center. And then we'll fill in the blank sections. You're not going to notice it too much if you overlap onto the image. So I wouldn't fuss too much. And then I just inked up a section of that stamp just so that I can get that center part to look a little more even around. So good enough. Okay, so coloring it in with Daffodil Delight, 3 sections, and then we're going to do Balmy Blue next. And I went back in with Daffodil Delight just to get that a little bit darker. And then Melon Mambo, which is a really bright color. And that totally makes this card super happy. Now I am going to go back in with the Balmy Blue just so that the tone matches that Melon Mambo. And then I go back in with the yellow, and then this part I kind of went around the inner part, which I didn't really care for, but I'll just leave it alone. All right, now we're going to stamp sentiment, so make sure your panel is where the short side is at the top and the long side is on the side before you stamp that sentiment. And then there's that panel from the card before. I just cut it down to fit this one, so we have a little mat, and then we'll raise it with some dimensionals and we'll stick it onto a panel, and then we'll grab the twine. I twirled it around 3 times, and then we'll reinforce the center of that twine with a glue dot. And then I have a single die cut flower from the kit and a double, and we're going to stick the single one to it like so, and then we'll raise it with some dimensionals, and then we'll place it over top of the twine center of the card. And I did stick some pearls onto this one also. There was a little piece of thread sticking out there, so we'll clean that one up. So I stuck the card onto a top folding card base, and this panel is not cut down in size, so it was easier to place. And then there are the 3 pearls, but because these cards were sitting on my desk for a bunch of weeks, the pearl did get moved, so you'll see that right now on my still, which I didn't notice until now. And then while I was taking images of all of the cards I made weeks and weeks ago, I decided to do a quick video and panned across all of the cards and added it to this video. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed today's card alternatives. Stay tuned for the last 2. I promise I'll get it to you as soon as possible. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye for now.